After years of keeping this tale to myself, I feel compelled to finally tell it due to current events. Perhaps it will be of use to someone else who is experiencing a comparable situation. Because of its length, I will divide it into sections. Reputation was the center of my world when I was a kid. Riverside Prep is one of those elite private schools that politicians and CEOs bring their children to, and both of my parents were teachers there. While Dad oversaw mathematics, Mom taught advanced placement English. What mattered most to them was their standing at the school. My mother would remind me of my identity. Cheryl, remember who you are, if I strayed into an inappropriate behavior. Your father was a teacher. Somebody is always keeping tabs on you. Countless times throughout my childhood, I overheard that expression. We used it as a slogan right up there with "your behavior reflects on all of us," and straight A's aren't an achievement, they're an expectation. They saw me as their ideal offspring since I was their only child. My friends, my attire, my grades, and even my manner of sitting at formal dinners were all under their watchful eye. I should have recognized the warning signals of their dominating behavior when I was younger, but growing up in that kind of home makes it all seem normal. My relationship with James Mitchell, which began during my junior year of high school, was the turning point in my life. His mom was a school board member, and his dad controlled half of the downtown real estate in our town. It was a huge deal for my folks. As I worked on my homework one night, Mom informed me, "This is exactly the kind of connection we've been hoping for. James is very future-oriented, and the Mitchells are an incredibly respectable family." "Just think, Cheryl," Dad went on to say while nodding, "you may be in for a truly amazing life if everything falls into place." At first, James and I got along famously well. He appeared to grasp the weight of having parents who set high standards, and he was also quite intelligent and humorous. Our future ambitions would occupy us for hours as we conversed. I intended to become a financial analyst, whereas he aspired to follow in his father's footsteps and work in commercial real estate. He would claim we could be such a power couple, with a hint of humor but a serious intention. The wealthy real estate magnate and his astute financial advisor wife. At family dinners, our parents would sit around the table and talk about our futures as we sat there smiling and nodding. On the outside, it seemed like everything was going according to plan. I began my freshman year at Winston College with James, and I was valedictorian of my class. I was also accepted into the esteemed business department at Winston. Our parents were quite pleased. Their mission was accomplished. Their ideal life for their daughter was unfolding just as they had imagined. Things went according to plan when I first entered college. We both dove headfirst into our studies at Winston, and suddenly it seemed like the world was coming together for James and myself. My business analytics teachers were very complimentary of my efforts, and I was keeping up with the flawless GPA my folks had hoped for. James and I became closer as we spent more time together in our spare time. We became close in the midst of our second year. We had been dating for over 3 years when we casually discussed getting married after graduation, so it seemed like a logical next step. I had everything figured out when I was 19 years old, head over heels in love. The next one was the nausea in the morning. I tried to convince myself it was stress or a stomach ailment at first, but after 2 weeks of constantly leaving my courses to go to the restroom, I couldn't continue to ignore it. I went to a drugstore across town and purchased 3 separate pregnancy tests since I didn't want a chance running into anyone I knew. Staring at those tiny pink lines on the floor of my dorm room is something I'll never forget. Positive, each one of the 3. Even sending a text to James to come over was a struggle because my hands were trembling so terribly. "You're In response to my disclosure, he turned pale. "Absolutely not. This is really unbelievable. This is not the time." As I attempted to maintain my composure, I stated, "I understand this is not the best time, but we can work through this together." Eventually, starting a family is something we've always discussed. In due time, James interrupted me. Yeah, once I finish college, once I've inherited my father's business, once we've tied the knot, then settled down. Not at this moment. What would this mean for my future, do you think? The impact was as sharp as a slap. How will we proceed? As he paced around my cramped dorm room, he warned that there was just one way out. An abortion is what you need. It is not the right time to start a family for us. Everything would be ruined. With a solid no, I responded. I refuse to do it. Behold, our offspring. When his parents discover out, he threatened to cut her off, he said. I will lose everything I have worked for. Cheryl, you can't treat me this way. Unfortunately, it has been done to me before. I was in the middle of an argument with James when my phone began to ring. The screen briefly displayed my mom's name. Return home. Now, she said with a frigid tone. This situation needs to be discussed. I was nauseous. How were you able to? James contacted his folks. People contacted us. We will personally come and grab you if you do not return home immediately. The 2 hours I spent driving home were the most torturous of my life. I was greeted by both sets of parents when I entered my parents' home. I wanted to vanish as soon as I saw the contempt on their faces. An angry, "How dare you?" came out of my mom. How outrageous that you expose us to such shame. The words, "You foolish, foolish girl," came out of my father's nose. Have you considered the impact on our standing at school? There was a great deal of sobbing from Mrs. Mitchell. James, our son, is going to have a fantastic life. Now is not the time to bind him to a baby. I'll take care of the baby on my own, I declared, protectively enveloping my belly. Neither James nor any of you are going to do anything for me. Is she a single parent? It was a sour laugh from my mom. Our daughter, raising a child alone. Is our little daughter going to destroy her life because she spreads her legs? For my father, it was an utterly unacceptable situation. Your careless actions will not bring disgrace upon our company. What do you mean, reputation? What I was hearing was unbelievable. Ah, this is your great-grandchild. No, Mrs. Mitchell stated with conviction. It is necessary to rectify this error. James is just starting off in life. Everything would be ruined by this. Hours passed while the conversation continued. It was more of a chit-chat than anything else. It appeared to be more of a concerted effort. Consider your future, Cheryl. My dad would repeatedly tell me, "Tell me how you intend to provide for a child. Guess where you'll be settling down." My mom further stressed that if I insisted on keeping my degree, we would stop paying for it. Would you like that? In order to ruin your whole future. As I sat there on the couch in our living room, I couldn't help but think of all the times I had spent there preparing for exams and daydreaming about my ideal future. For a moment, I considered dropping out of school, getting a job, and just living it up. Absolutely not in this locale. I could hear my mother's sharp voice. We will not tolerate you bringing disgrace into our home. Perhaps one of my aunts. I began, but my voice faltered. Neither of Mom's sisters lived in the United States, and Dad was an only child. I was really stuck. James sat still, his gaze fixed on the floor for the majority of it. He was completely silenced by his parents. His dad insisted that James would be interning at Morgan and reinvestments the following summer. Would you like to make it worse for him? How unconcerned are you about his future, if that? I was gradually worn down by them. They rejected every single one of my proposals. Every single one of my suggestions was shot down. Job salaries would be inadequate. There wouldn't be any inexpensive apartments. Without hope, there is no way forward. In the end, my mom took me to the doctor's office in her own car. The doctor conducted the initial exam in a professional but concerned manner. "I must warn you," she said, her eyes meeting mine, "that this operation may affect your future fertility. There could be dangers." Interrupting, my mom said, We've discussed all that. Okay, we're done deciding. I was watched by the doctor. I must have your response, Miss Thompson. Are you aware of the dangers? I was speechless. Gesturing was all I did. Little more than a week elapsed after that. I felt better enough to go back to Winston for the spring semester, where I dove headfirst into my coursework. James once attempted to engage me in conversation, muttering something about how everything worked out for the best, but I abruptly ended our conversation. At that point, we ceased all communication. I worked as a barista at a campus coffee shop over spring break instead of going home. After that, I began working extra shifts on holidays. Even though they were relieved to not have me around, my parents didn't complain. They were satisfied to continue paying for my tuition as long as I kept my GPA up and didn't do anything else wrong. We're glad you finally came to your senses, my mother said during one of our brief phone talks. It all turned out okay in the end. However, not a single option felt ideal. After that, everything felt off. Something inside of me had snapped, yet I continued to go through the motions, finishing all of my tasks and maintaining my flawless scores. Plus, I had a feeling everything will change drastically. Despite James's desperation to intern at one of the firms, I was able to secure a position as a financial analyst at Morgan and Reinvestments after graduation. I was the only deserving candidate, though, having graduated with honors and making a strong impression during interviews. A pleasant routine became the norm in life. Market trend analysis and financial model construction consumed me. Without everyone else's scrutiny or expectations, my apartment became a haven of peace and quiet. Then came the big night, the annual holiday gala of the corporation. My team leader was a dement, and I nearly backed out. "Cheryl, you can't hide behind those spreadsheets forever," she lectured. Meeting David took place there. He was a partner at the firm, but he wasn't the stuffy, haughty sort I was picturing. When I initially spotted him, he was in the midst of a basketball conversation with the housekeeping staff, very engaged in their March Madness predictions. I had to acquire his signature on a few reports, so I made a joke about how I hoped I wasn't interrupting a critical strategic meeting. His smile was the most inviting I had ever seen as he glanced upward. Jose was just detailing all the reasons why my bracket is destined to fail miserably this year, actually. A month after that, we began dating. David was unlike anyone I'd ever met before. He was honest, generous, and utterly unconcerned with his social standing or how he appeared. A year down the road, we were eating Chinese takeout in my cramped apartment when he finally proposed. "A large wedding isn't necessary for me," I informed him. He said, "Just us." With his sister and best friend present as witnesses, we conducted a modest ceremony at the courthouse. There were no fancy gowns, no paparazzi, and no worried rumblings about reputation. Truthfulness and love alone. I kept it a secret from my folks. Short birthday and Christmas messages were all we could exchange by that point. They didn't probe for details about my background, and I refrained from providing any. My mother finally gave in, called us 3 years into our marriage. She stated without providing any context that her father was ill. He must undergo surgical procedures. "Why don't you come?" As we neared my childhood house, David gave me a squeeze. There was not a single thing amiss. The lawn and trim were both immaculately maintained. Upon seeing David exit the vehicle, my mother's eyes widened in surprise. "Just who is this?" "My husband," I uttered with precision. 3 years have passed since we tied the knot. A remarkable metamorphosis ensued. They started out by being angry that I wasn't invited to the wedding, but their attitude transformed when David brought up his role as executive director, and they learned I had promoted to senior financial analyst. My mom exclaimed, "Oh, my darling, we've missed you so much," as if the past few years of silence hadn't transpired. "You really should drop by more frequently." And then the true cause of the call became apparent. Unfortunately, Dad's costly operation was not fully covered by their insurance. Am I of any assistance? I had finally hit my stride. Regarding the medical expenditures, I consented to chip in, even if it was an act of surrender, an act of forgiveness, or even my desire to demonstrate that I had prevailed in spite of all obstacles. I allowed myself to imagine for a brief minute that perhaps the past could remain in the past, because Dad seems truly thankful. David and I began discussing the possibility of starting a family after Dad's recuperation. We were ready to start a family, and the timing seemed perfect. Unfortunately, the months passed with no change. First, we made an effort to relax. These things take time, David would say, maintaining an optimistic outlook. However, we made the decision to visit a reproductive doctor following a year of failure. Very nice and meticulous, Dr. Martinez was. While taking her patient's medical history, she performed a battery of tests. The question I had been dreading finally came up. Have you ever been pregnant or had a miscarriage? My voice became parched. Nothing that transpired while David was a student was known to him. Sitting in that cold office, I finally had to tell him what I'd been keeping from him for far too long. I said, yes, a termination of pregnancy. During my teenage years, while taking notes, Dr. Martinez nodded in a businesslike manner. She broke the news that rocked my life after going over all the test findings. She stated gently that there had been issues due to the termination operation you had. When you consider the scarring that occurred afterwards, it's hard to believe that you had any chance of conceiving. The room spun around me. My mother disregarded the warnings of the clinic doctor all those years ago, even if they were accurate. I was now footing the bill for an option that had never truly been mine. I had to spill the beans to David that night. Sitting on our back patio, where we often plotted our future together, I spilled the beans about my college pregnancy, my parents' outrage, and the forced abortion. Whispering through my tears, I expressed my deepest apologies. I apologize for not informing you earlier. I get it if this makes a difference. David snatched me up in his arms and interrupted me mid-sentence. Hey, look at me, he whispered. The way I feel about you is unchangeable, under no circumstances. His arms were about me while we sat in quiet for a time, and then he spoke again. There are other paths to parenthood, you know. Consider adopting a child in need so that they can have a loving family. The words he spoke were an anchor. We stayed up that night looking into adoption agencies and their criteria, planning a future that was different from what we had envisioned, but full of love nonetheless. My parents and I had just restarted our relationship, yet already we were in an awkward pattern. With each appointment, the identical inquiry was made, then tell us, when will we get grandchildren? To avoid talking about the real issue, I would shift the conversation to anything else, like my job or my dad's rehabilitation. Before, they had demonstrated that they were more concerned with outward appearances than the well-being of their own grandson. I had no intention of letting them evaluate my decisions again. I continued sending them money every month, even after Dad had fully recovered, whether it was out of habit, shame, or the fact that I secretly believed that my financial success would finally win their true approval. I kept trying. I was caught off guard by the Thanksgiving invitation. They used to host holidays more often, but now my parents say they're too tired to do it. My mom was adamant this year, though. She mentioned that they were inviting some friends over. Just a few friends and family members, plus a few classmates and teachers. I ought to have been more astute. At least 30 individuals were already there when we got there. They were all influential members of the neighborhood school board and my parents' carefully selected social network. Things got off to a predictable start that night. Everyone couldn't help but notice my meteoric rise to fame, David's outstanding career, and the obvious pride my parents must have felt, just like the same superficial chats I'd had as a kid. The turning point arrived at that particular second. With a wine glass in hand, my mother cornered us behind the dessert table and spoke loudly enough for the other guests to hear. Cheryl, my grandma just showed me some photos of her new grandchild. How cute. When will you and David bless us with grandkids? Grandparenthood is already a wonderful experience for everyone else our age. David clasped my hand and gave me an honest answer before I could redirect. Adoption is actually something we're considering. We've initiated the application procedure. Following this, there was an ear-piercing quiet. Before she nearly yelled, my mother's face went through a range of reds. Is it adoption? Am I going crazy? People looked around. People began to cease talking. As the accomplished educator that she was, my mom held the attention of the crowd. Can you believe this, everyone? My daughter, who is capable of bearing us wonderful grandkids, is interested in adopting instead. Angrily, I hissed at my mother. The timing and location are wrong. Dad swung over from his perch beside the hearth. What on earth is all this hoopla about adoption? Do you intend to make us look foolish once more? Is there anything you know about these kids' backgrounds? Is it your intention to introduce criminals, addicts, and parents with mental illness into our family? You're causing quite a commotion. I addressed with conviction. This one is off limits. However, the harm had been done. After becoming drunk on holiday cheer and seeing my parents' reaction, my parents' friends began to join in. My darling, you should really have a family of your own, Mrs. Peterson suggested. When you adopt a child, you have no idea what you're getting. My cousin's friend became an adoptive parent, chimed in another visitor. What a tragic oversight. The kid was struggling with so many issues. Consider your family's legacy. Another voice yelled. My folks just stood there, nodding in agreement, obviously happy to have the support of their friends and family. The same arrogant looks they'd worn when they'd colluded to get me when I was pregnant years ago. A part of me suddenly cracked. Are you interested in the reason for our adoption? The low murmur of critical murmurs was drowned out by my voice. Are you seriously interested in finding out? Very well. I'll tell you why in no uncertain terms. Dead silence descended upon the room. I had had enough of defending their honor, even though I could see the warning signs in my mom's eyes. The complications from my abortion when I was 19 years old made it impossible for me to conceive. I had an abortion because you two were more worried about the opinions of my neighbors than you were with the well-being of your own daughter and grandson. A person let out a gasp. A half-full glass of wine was poised on Mrs. Peterson's lips. With a trembling but audible voice, I added, You threatened to expel me, halt my education, and abandon me unless I resolved the problem. The doctor cautioned that problems may arise. You do recall saying, We've made our decision, Mom. Certainly not I, we. My body, my unborn child, and my future were all up for grabs between you, Dad, and the Mitchells. As I looked around the room, I saw surprised expressions on everyone's faces. The only way for me to have a family right now, given my parents' obsession with protecting their precious reputation, is to adopt, so yes, we're adopting. Following this, there was an ear-piercing quiet. Then my mom did something that was predictable, but yet surprised me. She launched an assault. How dare you, she yelled out. You ungrateful girl, how dare you enter my home and tell such vicious lies? With shaky hands, she faced her guests. She made that up. She has a history of mental illness and is quick to place blame on others. She got herself into a jam and had an abortion. We didn't find out about it until much later. None of us would ever. Are you for real? I interrupted her. Are you seriously going to lie to everyone looking on? The medical records must be shown to them, David. In order to provide our fertility expert with the paperwork I had acquired from the clinic in the past, my husband retrieved my old medical records from his phone. My mom had a total breakdown just before he could raise them. Leave, she yelled out. Leave my house immediately. You never fail to wreck things, and this time is no exception. Step aside. Walking to the car with David, I could make out my mom's frantic, high-pitched voice as she frantically served additional drinks to her guests. all while trying to contain the situation inside. There was silence from my father. When it counted most, he remained motionless and mute. It was peaceful on the way home. Without once forcing me to speak, David only remained by my side the whole trip, holding my hand. Upon returning home, I promptly accessed my laptop and terminated the recurring monthly withdrawal from my parents' account. My mother did not call until precisely 2 months had passed. Her name popped up on my phone screen as I was going over our home study paperwork for the adoption agency. I debated not responding at all, but then I remembered that I was curious to hear her thoughts after Thanksgiving. The Petersons removed their son from the school. She started, skipping the greeting altogether. The invitations to Mrs. Chin's book club have stopped coming my way. Are you aware of the damage you've done to our company's image? I literally chuckled. Reputation remained her sole priority, even after all that had transpired. The harm you've done to your father and me is unacceptable, and you should pay for it. She spoke further. We are barely covering our social costs with the monthly help you were giving us. Our coworkers are behaving differently toward us. We've had to justify our actions and provide explanations. Apologies, please. Then I interjected, versus. I asked, as in the Thanksgiving fibs you made up, not to mention the fibs you've been telling yourself about your actions toward me for years. We helped you out because we wanted to, and now this is how you're paying us back, through the dissemination of malicious rumors and the subsequent financial isolation. What did I need? Now that I was speaking to her, my voice was firm and more composed than before. What did David and I do last week? Do you know? We scheduled an appointment with a therapist who focuses on supporting adoptive parents through the loss that comes with infertility. Something crucial was clarified for me by her. The abortion was only one aspect of what you accomplished. Mastery was at stake. In the end, it's all about power. You won't dare. My explanation was that the money was really only a tool for control. You believed you could exert control over me so long as I was making payments to you. Okay, I've taken care of that. I am through. You little ungrateful. After this call, I'm going to block your number and the other one as well. My adoption home study with David is nearly complete. We are hopeful that in a few months we will be matched with a child in need of a home, an innocent youngster who will never have to fear that their status will take precedence over their safety, someone who will love a child no matter what. What a fool you are, she hissed. So when you come to that realization, don't go backwards. Just as the call was about to end, I abruptly disconnected and blocked both of their phones. With a lighter heart than I had in years, I returned to my adoption paperwork. How long has it been? 6 months. The nursery for our little daughter, who will be here next month, is nearly complete. Thanks to David and me, it was our narrative that prompted her biological mother to choose us. She hoped her daughter would grow up with parents who valued love above everything else. On occasion, I find myself wondering what my parents are losing out on. They decided on this a very long time ago, though, as I recall. Appearances above family and reputation over love were their priorities. I'm making a different decision. I want my daughter to know that no matter what, she is loved and accepted just the way she is. There are no prerequisites, no anticipations, and no care for the opinion of the neighbors. As a last edit, we now have our daughter home with us. Optimal character,